Welcome to the Ontario Today phone-in. I'm Dave Stevens. Most of us have a favorite Canadian building that conjures up some kind of emotional reaction. Some might marvel at the engineering of the CN Tower. Others are drawn to a structure that is both functional and symbolic, like the grain elevators on the prairies or the shipyards of the East Coast. Others find their treasures closer to home in their own communities. Their favorites are the Victorian mansion across the street from their own house, a stately turn-of-the-century stone church on the main street, even a covered bridge on a country lane. The Royal Architectural Institute of Canada has been running a contest of sorts, asking Canadians to pick their favorite buildings. In fact, today members of the Institute are starting to compile the list of national choices, but there's still some time to get your nominees in. More on that later. But we thought we'd join in sort of an on-air nomination process this afternoon. On the phoning, we're asking you, what's your favorite Canadian building and why? Our toll-free number, 1-888-817-8995, 1-888-817-8995. In Ottawa, 241-7251, 241-7251. And if you're on the Bell Mobility Network, it's a free call at number symbol 800-2221, number symbol 800-2221. My guest this afternoon is Eliseo Temprano. He's president of the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada, and he's with me in our Ottawa studio. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for taking time out from your meeting.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's fair to put you on the spot or even appropriate given your position here with the Institute, but do you have a favorite Canadian building?
Oh, there's so much quality in our Canadian architecture that it's really hard to come down to a specific choice. I live here in Ottawa, and obviously, of course, the Parliament buildings are very close to my heart as a national symbol. But if I were to cross the land, I'm sure I'd come up with many, many favorite buildings. And I think that's the beauty here, and that's why we're focusing on celebrating the quality of architecture in Canada, and in a way, what kinds of things define us as Canadians. And I'm going to be very interested to see what kinds of things the callers come up with.
I'm glad it's not a cliche to say the Parliament buildings. I thought the same thing. I'm from Ottawa, and especially the backside, the side that so many Canadians see on their television screens is the Wellington Street side where all the trucks are today, the Peace Tower. But if you see the library at the back of the buildings and the Peace Tower behind that is a truly wonderful sight.
And I think that all Canadians hopefully can get the chance to visit the capital. But beyond that too, many of our other communities throughout the land, smaller communities that quite often most people may not get to visit, have very significant building types and structures that are important and not just necessarily done by famous architects, but in a way what we would call more anonymous architecture of a particular type and style. And these kinds of things that are close to your heart that kind of make your everyday life much more richer are the kinds of things that are important to us.
What comes to mind, and again, I'm betraying my Eastern Ontario bias, having lived here for the last 20 years or so. I mean, I think of stone houses in Perth, a small town, 6,000 people. In a slightly bigger city, the limestone City Hall in Kingston is quite a striking sight, I've always thought. And so yes, there are so many. And if you are calling in this afternoon, we're not asking you to name a specific building or a specific architect if you don't know, but to describe a type, that's fine. In your search, how far-ranging are you being?
Well, it's interesting because when we sat down this morning, our list was just trying to get at a first cut was 400 or 500 buildings that have been nominated for various reasons by different directors on our board that represent the country, because our board is represented by 10 directors across the country. So it's quite interesting. Our issue at the beginning is that we want to be inclusive, not exclusive. The idea is not to come up with a list that's very narrow and small, but one that really shows exactly what the quality of Canadian architecture and the contribution has been over the last 1,000 years, because we're also looking at Aboriginal structures too, before the coming of the Europeans. And there's some wonderful examples in that area, I think, that were responsive to the environment and the conditions of the times, that as Canada are as essential to defining our identity as our newer structures that were finished even several years or yesterday.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're sitting in a building that might garner some attention too because of its importance and as a style. We're in an old railway hotel in downtown Ottawa, but next door used to be a building called the Daily Building, which was often cited mainly by people, I think, who know something about architecture as a building worth saving because it's an example of the Chicago style of architecture. The old Ottawa City Hall, part of which is still standing, was cited as the International School, and
Yes.
a lot of people don't know anything about architecture say they're just ugly buildings and they ought to be blown up, and one of them was. The final list, is it going to reflect that the sort of the architectural know-how, or is this basically a popularity contest?
Well, it's going to reflect both. I think there will be an element of the issues of popularity, and I think there's going to be an element also of the area that within the architectural community is well known. But I think architecture, it will be reflected, its success, in that it is received by the Canadian public and its users. This architecture is not sculpture, it has a functional use. Mm-hmm. Interesting you mentioned this building, the Chateau Laurier, because it is a building type that reflects an approach, I guess, in our history with arriving at a railway station and walking across to a grand hotel. And if you look at some of these buildings, like the Chateau Frontenac, Chateau Laurier, the Royal York, the Empress Hotel in Victoria, and many others, it's really kind of our Canadian identity, and it's reflected in these structures. You don't see these things in other countries. And I think if we can get at that kind of essential quality, then perhaps a lot of Canadians across the country and in Ontario like the Chateau Laurier, and that's wonderful. We also discussed these railroad buildings, and we don't want to include them, in a sense, the hotels especially, as a generic type, because they are so rich and so different. Mm-hmm. I think we're going to probably see a lot of them make that list. Well,
you mentioned railway stations, and I drive by it a couple of times a day. I forget that building across the street, which is now the Government Conference Centre, soon to be, we're told, the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame. That used to be the railway station in Ottawa when the trains came down what's now Colonel By Drive, I guess.
That's right, and that building, in a sense, has been recycled, and there are buildings who have been recycled. Mm-hmm. In the case of Ottawa, we have a more modern building, which is a wonderful quality building that I'm pretty confident will make the list, is the Ottawa Railway Station.
But in smaller towns, I think the train station might be... that is seen as an important structure within the community, and that's why so many communities failed, or tried rather, many of them failed to keep them alive.
Well, the train station, the city halls, and the revolution of cities. The other thing was post offices, and actually this is an issue that I've been looking at, is the issue of federal presence. When we talk about Ottawa, we definitely have a federal presence, which we mentioned before, and in the past we tended to have more of a federal presence, either typified in our post office approaches and styles and other types of community buildings. Perhaps in the frenzy of economic activity, in some cases, maybe we've lost a little bit of that. Mm-hmm. The convenience store is kind of become a bit of a reflection of federal presence, and is it so? And what we're trying to do here is take the upside and say, look, we've done all these things and we've done them so well. How can we continue to do these things? And do Canadians have it uppermost in mind that when they want their wishes expressed in architecture and in building, are we doing the best that we can? And we have to have a mandate, because architects don't operate in a vacuum, and I think the public has to say, we want excellent quality structures, and these are the kinds that we want, and these are the reasons why we want them. So that's really the positive spin and outcome that comes out of reflecting back on what we've done well. How can we continue to do more?
Sure, we might hear a few church buildings mentioned too, and some grand old homes here this afternoon, but I don't want to put words in people's mouths here, and we've got lines pretty well full here, so let's hear what our audience has to say this afternoon. My guest in studio, Eliseo Temprano, president of the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada. Let's go first to Jeff in Whitby. Good afternoon, Jeff.
Good afternoon.
What's your favorite Canadian building?
Well, I can say that where my building is located is not famous for architecture, but it's the Robert McLaughlin Gallery in Oshawa, Ontario, designed by Arthur Erickson, who did the Canadian Embassy in Washington. And it's a wonderful new building. It's about 15 years old, almost 15 years old, and houses a wonderful collection of art. The curator of the museum there is Joan Murray, who's championed Canadian art for a long time. All the members of the Group of Seven are exhibited there, a permanent collection. The gallery was named after the father of Oshawa's most famous citizen, Sam McLaughlin. Mm-hmm. And one of the patronesses of the art was his daughter, Isabel McLaughlin. So there's a real huge connection between the McLaughlins' art and culture in Oshawa, and I think it's a wonderful building.
Right. Are you familiar with it, Eliseo?
I haven't visited personally. I've heard of it, and I think that as a community building, it's been made reference to, and I think that that kind of a quality of building that plays such an important role and has links within the community is a really good candidate.
Jeff, help.
It's located in the sort of civic square of Oshawa, and there's 50s buildings. St. George's Church, which is a wonderful neo-Gothic church, is across the road. The Oshawa Library is located close by. So there's a kind of nice collection representing a variety of architectural styles, and we could probably add to the collection, but it's really a wonderful building, full of light. There's a restaurant inside. So I love it.
Yeah. Jeff, on my screen here in studio, it says Robert McLaughlin Building, and I thought you might have mentioned, is there not a Robert McLaughlin estate, a car museum or something like that?
Well, the most famous building maybe in Oshawa would be the Samuel McLaughlin's Parkwood Estate.
Right, okay, sorry. Wrong McLaughlin, yeah.
An Italianate 1920s mansion, which is open to the public as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that one I was familiar with, and I just thought we might make mention of it while we were just talking about Oshawa. Thanks very much for your call. And we talk about Oshawa, and I think Jeff made the comment, you're not necessarily known for its architecture, but you're also looking for industrial type sites too. And one might argue, given the importance of the auto industry to this province, that you might take a car plant. I don't know whether you choose the GM plant in Oshawa, but
we actually. Have explored structures such as bridges, industrial buildings, anonymous architecture, like I mentioned. And it's a bit of a reach for some of us because Canada is such a large country. And we have talked about, for example, the Sydney steel mill as one. And it has been mentioned, a lot of our larger industrial structures. And because it has been or not been done by an architect isn't really the issue here. The issue is, are these magnificent in their own right? And are they worthy of celebration? And the answer we have as a board is a resounding yes.
All right, let's move on. Jeff, thanks for your call. Julie in Kingston. Hello, Julie.
Oh, hi. Thanks so much for taking my call. It's really hard to limit my choice to one particular building. I tend to prefer, coming from the Kingston area, stone buildings. Kingston has some wonderful examples of cut stone buildings, but what really actually fascinates me is buildings which have been constructed of natural stone, where the stone is rounded, and it looks like an artisan has just pieced the stones together to construct a building. And those houses and those barns, or the foundation of barns, just absolutely, I find they're just really works of art, because the amount of work that has to go into that is just really amazing. Also, too, I had the opportunity to visit Iqaluit and witnessed the construction of what the Eskimo call a snow house, and I would have to nominate that as probably one of my choices too, for the ingenious simplicity of constructing a house out of snow, and it's really just quite remarkable to see a structure being created out of snow. So that would be one of the buildings I would nominate.
All right, Julie, thanks very much. As you mentioned, I guess that you are quite open to that kind of
well, we have talked.
Both,
in the snow house, I would assume that we're referring to what we mentioned as the igloo, and actually. We've had nominations from several parts of the country for that type of structure because, again, it's a response to the environment and it reflects a way and style of life, including the teepee, for example, as a building type. So the snow house is a wonderful structure.
I think I have an idea of the stone she was describing, fairly large type stones, but in Quebec, the smaller stone is quite a prominent architectural feature as well.
Well, one of the things that's really interesting in Canada is the development went from east to west. Obviously, what happened is we had influence of Europeans who brought their building styles with them, and they had to kind of adapt techniques and trades that they had in their home country to the realities of the materials in the area, and then by default actually created a Canadian approach to building. And that's quite interesting as we see development across the country and refinement, I guess, of the trades, and then becoming more people in the country that then developed their own skills.
Let's take another call. David calling from Jones Falls. Hello, David.
Hello.
What's your favorite Canadian building?
Well, I certainly find myself agreeing with the previous caller because I live in the same region. However, near me, in the little village of Morton, there's a small octagonal red brick building known simply as the Pimple. It's a one-room schoolhouse, and it stands on a rocky mound. It's absolutely lovely, but sadly going into neglect, and a portion of it has fallen down, although it still has its roof and it's tight yet, I believe. It's unique, and I think that's part of its charm. There are several other octagonal buildings in eastern Ontario. I've noted a number in Prince Edward County, actually.
This is a brick building, is it?
It is brick on a stone foundation, standing on top of a stone knoll, actually.
Actually, so it actually has a bit of a landmark appeal also.
Yes, more or less. It's become overgrown around it, but there is a village around and houses and so on. It can be seen quite clearly through the winter, but come summer, it hides in the woods.
It's really interesting how architecture, in a way, becomes a bit of a symbol and a statement, and how much we lose if those kinds of things were not there or are removed.
I find the octagonal use, or the multi-sided feature of it, really unique. I've never seen this in other parts of Canada. I'm originally from Western Canada, so this I find quite unique.
Well, we'll take a good look at that one.
Yeah, thanks very much, David, for your call. Yeah, the Red Schoolhouse, the Little Red Schoolhouse, too. I'm thinking of one in Desmond, which isn't too far from Kingston either. It's a little more traditional. I believe it's made out of wood and 4 sides, but been nicely restored as a community center. The site of the annual Manure Festival. They'll appreciate the plug. Let's go on at 22 past the hour to Joanne in Paris, Ontario. Hello, Joanne.
Hello.
Yes,
How are you today?
Just fine, thanks. What's your favorite Canadian building?
Well, I live over in Paris. I was born in Northern Ontario, and one of the things I remember so well in Northern Ontario, of course, are our forestry towers. You know, the lookouts for the forest fires.
Oh, yeah.
And Canadian history is a fascinating thing to me. And one thing that really breaks my heart is to see the old barns going down. And I lived in Claremont where they were going to put the airport in. They didn't build. And some of those barns, I must say, the boards in the attics, they'd be 36 inches wide, virgin timber, so beautiful. And when you were, the hay lofts, and when you were up there, it was like being in a cathedral. You know, I've never been to Europe, but when you think about those incredible stone structures built during the ancient times, but our barns were so magnificent, and they bring you so close to God. I can't quite understand the feeling, but I guess it's wrapped up in our Canadian feeling. But over here in Paris, we have a lot of the cobblestone, and I was waiting. I was looking for the gentleman that did all the building. He's very well known, and we have an architectural tour. But our churches and a lot of our old homes, and they're so truly lovely. To think, I know when I dig my garden, I turn up a lot of it, and I can't even imagine how many of those little stones are put into these homes. And they were built so long ago, and I think of the most incredible pride that people must have had putting them up and moving their families in and thinking about their grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And now here we are in the year 2000, looking back over a couple of hundred years at our Canadian structures, our schools, when you're saying, our legislature and all of those important buildings. But I don't really think we should forget our lighthouses, our forestry towers, our schools, even the most humble buildings, you know?
Yeah, you mentioned barns, but farmhouses too.
Oh.
I especially, and not exclusively, but a nice big stone house on what appears to be a prosperous farm.
Oh, yes.
Wonderful.
And, an interesting thing, too, is because people live together so much. I just think of the man and wife coming here, perhaps from Europe, where they couldn't own property, it wasn't available, and what they had to do to clear the land, pick up all the stone, have it quarried, save, build them, and their families and friends and neighbors that helped them, and then they started out with the one baby and worked their way through these huge families, and the generations of people living in them, and even today where there'd be 3 or 4, you might have a few sons and their wives, their daughters and husbands, and people still live this way, which is good. It's so different from Toronto folks, they're kind of isolated, or big cities. People still live in these beautiful 17 rooms, 10-bedroom homes, and have them full of children. It's great.
What really warms my heart to hear the passion and the feeling here for the structures, and one reinforces that what we're trying to do here is to really see just how important in our culture architecture and everyday buildings that we've done in the past are to our daily life.
Joanne, thanks very much for your call. 26 past the hour. Ian in Ottawa now. Hello, Ian.
Good afternoon. I really enjoy your program, particularly Ed Lawrence, whom I've been listening to for 30 years, I guess. My favorite.
I think he's only been here 18, Ian. But anyway, we won't split hairs. But anyway.
Slight exaggeration. I've lived most of my life outside of Canada, although I am a Canadian. My favorite building is the Bank of Canada here in Ottawa. It's a fantastic blend of the old and the new. The old building being the yolk of the egg, if you like, and the white being the aquatic garden with the tropical plants inside and the various forms of money, like that huge mill wheel type piece of money. And then the shell of the egg being the glass facade. My second choice would be Moshe Safdie's National Gallery. Third building would be the Eagle Airy Gallery in Tofino on Vancouver Island, which is owned by an artist called Roy Vickers, who's really incredible. And then historic. I've never seen an igloo, although I've lived in Whitehorse and traveled around in the north a bit, but an igloo would definitely take a strong position in my academic appreciation. And the West Coast Indian sort of longhouses with the decorated fronts and the totem poles, what have you.
Yeah. Well,
anyway, we're very lucky to have great architecture, and and for sheer magnificence, the Chateau Frontenac is in such a wonderful position. And last but not least, the Chateau Laurier can't be all bad because Walt Disney used it, I believe, as a design for one of the castles in one of his films.
Yeah, who said it was all bad? Anyway,
that's a great list. A great list.
A wide company list, and it's interesting. Ian mentioned the mix of old and new, and I hadn't really thought of the Bank of Canada building, which is, as he said, the white stone and then the kind of blue-green glass. Another mix of old and new in downtown Ottawa, and actually it was favored. It was commented on quite favorably by an architect I once did a story with. This is a long time ago. He does art direction for Hollywood films, and we were touring downtown Ottawa looking for potential sites, as if somebody were shooting a movie, not Walt Disney. And he was quite taken with the combination of the old Teachers College in downtown Ottawa with the new regional government headquarters, which is more of a stone building, some glass. Ray Moriyama, I believe, was the architect there.
That's right.
And that was a successful marrying of two buildings. I think the courthouse next door he thought make a good prison flick, but that's we'll leave that aside. And the Peace Tower, he thought he could see King Kong climbing that too. But anyway, but that's an interesting point. And as Eliseo Temprano's mentioned, quite a list there, Ian. Thanks very much for the call. We do have to pause for the news update. We'll take more of your calls after that. The number 2 call, if you want to tell us about your favorite Canadian building and tell us why it's your favorite, 1-888-817-8995. 1-888-817-8995. In Ottawa, 241-7251. And if you're on the Bell Mobility Network, a free call at number symbol 800-2221. My guest in studio, Eliseo Temprano, president of the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada. I'm Dave Stevens. We'll be back in 90 seconds.
It's 1:30 and 0 degrees in Ottawa. You're listening to CBC Radio 1. Here are the news headlines. More than 150 trucks remain lined up on Wellington Street just off Parliament Hill at this hour. They're there to protest rising gas prices. The trucks converged from across Ontario to demand government action to lower the cost of diesel fuel. The trucks continue to idle on Wellington, and Wellington remains closed from Lyon to Elgin, as do streets north of Queen to Wellington. The truckers say they will leave the area at 2:30. Meantime, a Liberal MPP from the Belleville area wants Premier Harris to recall the legislature to deal with the high gasoline prices. Prince Edward Hastings MPP Ernie Parsons says his constituents are frustrated with what he says is the Premier's refusal to stand up to the oil companies. And Ontario's only French teaching hospital will be back in court again, this time in Toronto. The Ontario Court of Appeal will hear the case from the province's Health Services Restructuring Commission. We'll have more on these and other stories coming up at 2 o'clock. In the weather, a mix of sun and cloud today with some scattered flurries expected. Winds from the northwest to 40 kilometers per hour. Today's high near +2. We've already gotten close to that today. Clear tonight, and winds will diminish. The low near -7 degrees. The outlook for Saturday, increasing cloudiness with a chance of flurries tomorrow evening. Saturday's high near +4. It's currently 0 degrees in Ottawa. The winds are from the northwest at 20 kilometers per hour, and the relative humidity is 51%.
Welcome back to the Ontario Today phone-in. What is your favorite Canadian building and why? My guest, Eliseo Temprano, president of the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada. The lines are full. Let's go to Paul in Toronto now. Hi, Paul.
Afternoon. Thank you for taking my call. Hello, Dave and Eliseo.
Hi.
My selection sprang to mind immediately, and it's the Hart House at the University of Toronto. And at first I thought it was probably unfortunate to pick something in Toronto because there are so many other options, but this building has enormous historical and personal meaning. As a graduate of U of T, I spent a lot of time in that building, and for those of your listeners who don't know what the Hart House is, it really is a historical building. I can't remember the name of the architect, and I'm not sure what year it was built. It was probably just after the First World War that it was constructed, but it is a building that imitates the British College, Oxford and Cambridge type of construction, but inside it is really, in a different spelling, the heart of the University of Toronto. It's named after Hart Massey and the historical roots of the Massey family with farming and agriculture in Canada, plus the focus on education that this building provides. It really is the hub and heart of the University of Toronto.
Paul, hang on a sec. We have another caller who I believe wanted to nominate the same building. Ted in Ottawa. Hi, Ted.
Hello.
Hi. You were also going to choose Hart House?
Yeah, I also went to the University of Toronto, and I just loved Hart House while I was going there. I think generations of students have developed a love for the place.
Well, one way of determining your tenure at the University of Toronto and attendance at Hart House is to ask Ted if he wore a bathing suit when he swam in the Hart House pool or not.
Gosh, I can't remember. I don't think so.
Well, it's only in the last I guess 10 or 15 years that it's become coeducational. So that's a litmus test, if you will.
Yeah.
What's interesting is the issue of the meaning of these buildings and how we reflect back in our memory, and these things then become so much part of our lives. That's what I've heard with the callers in this particular structure, that your life has been enriched by having had the experience of being educated and experiencing that building.
Right. Let's move on. I'll give you the numbers here. If you're just joining us, 1-888-817-8995, and in Ottawa, 241-7251. Paul and Ted, thanks very much for your calls. Carla in Vineland Station now. Hi, Carla.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi.
What's your favorite Canadian building?
Well, it's actually my own home.
I guess you won't be moving anytime soon then, will you?
No.
What's so special about your own home?
Well, we bought it 2 years ago by accident, and we just can't believe that we've landed here. It seems like a miracle. When we bought the house, we were given over a binder of information that was written by the original owners, and so the whole house is documented, the history, how it was built, and where the materials came from. And I have a bit of an entry here if you wanted me to read part of it. I find it quite fascinating.
Sure.
Okay. We're actually called Bonnie Bank, and we're on the banks of the 20 Mile Creek in Vineland Station. And the first entry is from 1794 from Mrs. Simcoe's diary as they came into the Jordan Harbor in the 20 Mile Creek. And then this family themselves built the original house in 1919, and then there was some incarnations. And now we're in an American Tudor Revival house. And the entry says, 1938, house too small, decided to add on 9 feet north and east. Then war on in 1939 and decided to cut off 2 east rooms boarded up east side. And then put stone around outside and insulated with plaster. Stone for the house from piers on railway land sold to us. stone is Medina sandstone, which is the red Grimsby sandstone, from quarries owned by Senator Gibson and sold by him to Grand Trunk Railway for construction of bridge across the Jordan. Quarries were where the 16-mile creek comes over the escarpment. Railway piers on both sides were left when bridge dismantled to have new double-track steel bridge. Now it's the Grand Trunk Railway they dismantled there. Then it's a terrific cost to take down the pier, but just then, 1938, Queen Elizabeth Highway was to be built, and they needed large stones for rip-wrapping at Jordan Harbor. Roger Clark, who was the dad, interviewed the Ontario Highways Department, and they sent engineers to look at the bridge. It was arranged that the Highways Department should take down the pier, they to have all the large stones, 2 ton each, and place all the other stone on top of the hill. Also carry loads of rubble to place an excavated drive by barn and house to 2 feet deep. This was done at a cost of over $2,000, but agreed cheaper than buying new stones.
Wonderful that they kept such detailed records of all the changes to the house. The way you describe it being perfect, I take it that it isn't evident that there have been all those changes over the years.
Yes, and we have the original blueprints, too, which are marvelous, because my husband's a builder, and the house does need some work, so we can look at the original plans and try to figure it out, because there's so many different foundations downstairs and the wonderful stone.
There's a lot of detective work. I guess it's a real privilege to be able to live in your favorite house.
Yeah. But, I mean, I think it's important to mention private residences here, and I guess we talked about it with the farmhouses. It's not necessarily private residences of the rich and famous here. I mean,
no, that's, again, the inclusivity issue is that, of course, there are a lot of residences that are very particular importance in architectural history. They have a special category of their own. The issue of the more residences like the ones that are mentioned, I think if you look back, although this one is very unique, every one is very unique with respect to its history, but some of them have this common expression, a generic kind of approach and type and look. One of the beauties of buildings is that they evolve over time and they adapt themselves to the realities of the society. And that's
closed 2 rooms on the east side because of the war. Great, wonderful stuff. Thanks very much for the call, Carla. And I hope that our listeners can hear this, but I understand we've been having some transmission problems here. We're aware of it. Our technicians are working out resolving that, and if they haven't already been resolved, we hope they will be soon. Let's move on now. David on the line from Leamington. Hello, David.
Yes, hi.
What's your choices, your favorite Canadian building?
Well, I guess I wanted to bring up 2 points, first of all, and one is that I wanted to just talk about European architecture, because I think there was some reference earlier to all kinds of indigenous architecture, and it would be hard for me personally to come close to the kinds of architecture like the Longhouse of the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois Confederacy. Some wonderful community ideas built right into the architecture and a real expression of their society. But if I was going to speak to industrial European architecture, if you will, I wanted to talk about the Cotton Mills complex, which is in Cornwall along the waterfront. I don't know if you know the buildings, but reputedly they would have been the first place where electric lighting was used in an industrial application. And they're really beautiful buildings. I think one of your earlier callers talked about cathedrals, and in a sense, I think all of the architecture that was talked about today are almost like personal cathedrals to each one of us. And I think that, having worked in those buildings for a couple of years, in some offices in that building, because it's in the process of being renovated, it was a really wonderful sense that you were living in a part of a industrial heritage of Canada. Yeah, well, I mean, it's so nice, and that so many of these buildings are being maintained and, as you say, renovated, even though their original purpose is no longer, I guess, economically viable, given globalization and all, that they still remain, and still, as you say, David, serve as a reminder of our past, too. Well, I think that if you want to, the spiritual aspect of architecture, the sense of place that an architecture creates is so important. And when I was originally thinking of calling in, I was thinking of Fortress of Louisbourg in Cape Breton, because when you're standing out there on the ramparts looking out to the water, you have that sort of experience of loneliness that the soldiers would have had when they were there, and it's a wonderful creation of a spirit of place. But you get that same sense of spirit in a different way, I guess, from the Cotton Mills complex. And that's much, to be attributed to the Knebb family in Cornwall, that have really put their heart and souls into renovating those buildings so they can come to life again, if you will. David, thanks very much.
I think the industrial buildings, sometimes it's difficult because we've had this period of time where these structures have fallen into disuse, and then we kind of have to rediscover them. And that's part of what this celebration is about, in a way, is to take a good look at these community structures and buildings that perhaps as they had other lives, but they still remain as structures that have meaning to us who have the privilege to be able to either work or live in them.
Yeah. Let's go now to Carolyn in Ottawa. Hello, Carolyn.
Hi.
What's your favorite Canadian building?
Well, I love buildings that are not only beautiful themselves, but also allow you to see the beauty of the nature and the scenes, the setting around you. For instance, the Museum of Civilization in Hull, and there's also a museum, I think it's a native museum at the University of in Vancouver. But the one I want to recommend is Science North in Sudbury. It's a beautiful, beautiful building, and it has wonderful glass that allows you to see the beauty of Sudbury itself, but it also incorporates the environment around it. It's built on a huge piece of granite, and the granite is part of the building. To get to the main part of the building, you have to go through a tunnel that's right through the granite, and the granite forms part of the wall, and I was just part of the wall of the main structure of the building, and I was just absolutely awe-inspired when I saw it last summer for the first time.
Yeah, I remember that building. That one has got a very shiny surface on it, I think I remember, and it contrasts in an incredible way with the stone and the setting. I remember being there a few years ago. I think it's right by one of the lakes there
yes,
also.
right on the lake.
Yeah, and that building is very, very beautiful, and the contrast that's created with the natural stone is something that has been exploited very well.
Yeah, and regardless of the beauty of the building, well worth visiting for what's inside, too.
Oh, exactly, yeah. It's a wonderful, wonderful place to visit.
Carolyn, thanks very much. They got it right on all fronts. John in Waterloo now. Hello, John.
Hi, Dave.
Yeah, your choice is your favorite Canadian building?
My choice would be the Horse Palace at the CNE grounds in Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
I relate it more maybe to an event that takes place every year, the Royal Winter Fair. Usually it's the only reason I get to Toronto. My one trip, actually we usually go down 3 or 4 times, but just the stable area, everything about the place, they really dress it up for the Royal Winter Fair. So I haven't seen it outside of that event, but that's a special building for me.
Yeah, we had a caller online earlier, and I guess he or she had to run, but there was a choice for the Princess Gates at the CNE too. I noted earlier, which also an impressive. I don't see many votes for Exhibition Stadium. Not that it's around anymore.
Not there anymore. Parking.
Steak by the Lake, I think, as they used to call it. But yeah, an interesting mix of architectural styles on the CNE grounds in Toronto. John, thanks very much. Again, that was almost as much as what the building meant or what went on in it as
well, I think it's really
actual
interesting, the activity of a building. I mean, it's one thing to kind of look at it in absence of its use and as a structure, and another thing is to experience it while it is satisfying the need for which it was designed. And that experience, in many cases, is a wonderful one and deals with the success of the architecture.
We have about 15 minutes left. My guest for the phone-in this afternoon here on CBC Radio, Eliseo Temprano, president of the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada, which is asking a similar question here, and at the end of the hour we'll tell you how you can make a formal submission for your favorite building for the survey that is being done by the Institute now. Let's hear more of your calls now. Mark on the line from Haileybury. Hi, Mark.
Hi, how are you?
Just fine, thanks. Your choice?
My choice? Well, right outside my dining room window, I used to have a beautiful head frame that I used to get to look at, but they took it away, and it's in downtown Cobalt now. It's they're using it as a tourist information center, and it's sort of a reminder of our history as a mining camp. And throughout the north, you'll see these, and your local councils or whatever, or associations or whatever will, side them up and paint them up, and they really are quite handsome as far as I'm concerned.
So now, I got to admit here, Mark, and maybe I'm not the only one out here, so I'll ask it on behalf of all those other listeners. What does a head frame look like before it's turned into a tourist information booth anyway?
Well, every one is unique, but they have similarities in construction. What they are is a tall, rectangular structure, several stories high with a peaked roof usually. And on one side, they have either some timbers or an addition that goes off at an angle about 45 degrees for the hoists for the cables for the elevators to bring the men up and down from the mine the ore.
Okay, I got you now. I just didn't know that's what it was called. Right,
well,
okay.
People call them mine shafts, but the shaft is below the head frame.
Absolutely.
Well, actually, that's interesting because when I just left our discussion, there was talk, and I'm not familiar with the Flin Flon mine, I believe. And I think that mining structures and related to mining are also incredible structures in their own right. And it's very, very interesting that you've nominated that one, and I really welcome that.
Well, I miss mine, the one that I used to get to look at. It really added to the view, as far as I'm concerned, anyways. And if I can throw another one in, across the north, we've got all of these lovely old railroad stations that are falling into disuse. And actually, they tore down the one in Halebury, and it was a crying shame.
Yeah, I think I made mention of it earlier too, but I can just picture it. And some of them are being restored, but sadly, too many of them have been lost. Mark, thanks very much for your call this afternoon. George in Walkerton now. Hello, George.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, your choice.
As your host, your guest rather, will probably tell you there's a history of building where everybody used the local materials, and we have lots of stone, lots of logs over here, and hence the log cabin. But the building I wanted to talk to you about is a water-powered mill, which has been restored, and it earns its keep because it's a shingle mill, and it's up in Welbeck area, Bentinck Township on the Bruce, Great County. And it's still functioning. It has instead of a water wheel, it has a drop turbine. But it's all powered by water and still functioning, post and beam structure. It's been there years and been renovated, and hence the turbines in there, But it's a beautiful structure, and it's a functional structure, and using the energy that's available, the latent energy in the rivers. The Saugeen River feeds this mill, and it's one of the few in the area, in the Great Bruce area, that is still working.
And I think our landscape was dotted with many very similar structures, so it's wonderful we could actually have one like that that's still in use.
George, thanks very much for the call. We're going to get to as many as we can before we run out of time. Kate on the line from Toronto now. Hello, Kate.
Hi there.
Yes, your choice is your favorite Canadian building.
My favorite Canadian building would be the Sharon Temple, which is in Sharon, Ontario.
Right, I should have known that.
Which is a village just north of Newmarket.
Right, well, the reason I should have known that is because I grew up in Newmarket. I should have thought of it earlier is what I meant to say.
Well, I had the pleasure of growing up in Sharon, and I got married in the Temple and worked there for a couple of summers, so it's very close to my heart. I think it's just an incredible structure, and it has a really interesting story behind the building of the actual building and also the people who, built it and created the place that it's set in.
Beautiful, simple, white building. Yeah.
Looks a bit like a wedding cake.
Right. Appropriate locale for a wedding. Of course, they don't call it Sharon anymore. It's the Greater Queensville area.
Oh, well, it's always Sharon to the people that live there.
At least I hope the structure is still the same. The names can change, but hopefully the structure is there.
Yeah. Well, it's an incredible place, and particularly in September they hold something called an illumination ceremony, which dates back to when the original use of the building as a religious place, and all of the windows are lit with candles. And originally it must have just been incredible because when there weren't a lot of trees, when they'd been cut down for farming in the area, you would have been able to see this building for just miles and miles because it's quite tall, and all the windows would have the candles glowing in them. So it's really incredible in all seasons, and during the day and at night. So I think everybody should go and have a look if they haven't already.
It's worth a drive out to look at it.
Yeah, it really is. It's pretty unique.
Yeah,
so.
Kate, thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right, Margaret in Belleville. Hello, Margaret.
Hello.
Yes, your choice is your favorite Canadian building?
Well, I have several here in Belleville that I really think are quite important buildings. One is the City Hall. It's a Victorian building, and it just was a few years ago they renovated it, and it's really a beautiful building, and they've made it really work for a modern day City Hall. And it originally was built as with a market square underneath the building, but now they have the market square surrounding it, and that whole area has all been redone, and it's just a beautiful people area. They have a stage there now where they can hold outdoor concerts and so on. It's really a beautiful facility. and so people can use it as well as the politicians,
Not just a place to pay your taxes. Well, no, it's interesting how it's always been functional, and they have changed it to make it more functional for today's times.
Yes, they have. So it's an adaptation of old and new.
Mm-hmm.
And the other place is the railroad station. It's a beautiful stone railway station.
Your favorite Canadian building?
My favorite Canadian building is in actually Victoria, BC. It's Craig Darragh Castle, and I got to visit the building several times a week for several years when I was a child, because it was also the Victoria Conservatory of Music, and I was a music student there.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember it for its grandeur and its opulence from another era. I mean, it was built as a labor of love by Robert Dunsmuir for his wife, I believe. And it towers over the area of Rockland, which is just near BC Government House, and there's a huge, beautiful view of the Olympic Mountains across the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and there's like 20-something fireplaces and 5 floors, and bell tower and the whole bit. It's incredible.
Is it one of those beautiful, large, I guess, originally private homes, now used for something else?
Well, I believe it's been turned back into a museum piece, and they hold tours and such for it.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much for that one. I guess what comes to mind in the description is also one a little closer to home, Casa Loma. Too.
Yeah, that image came to my mind, too. I'm not familiar with the building in Victoria, but the Casa Loma is one that actually gets a fair amount of public tours and interest, and also was a very wealthy person's home and an ambition.
Yeah, just a word of advice, don't visit it when the humidex is 45 degrees on a hot summer day. The last time I was there, there isn't any air conditioning on the 3rd floor. Sir Henry didn't think of it at that time when he built it, I guess. Nina in Toronto now. Hi, Nina.
Hi. I would like to draw your attention to the building on 97 Old Forest Hill Road, and on the other side is at Vesta Drive. And the building is different than all other buildings on Forest Hill. Sort of like medieval like architecture, red bricks on the roof, and stone, built in stone, sort of irregular building.
Is it a private home, Nina?
Private home, yes, but I don't know anything about people who live there. But this is very, beautiful, very private, and sort of lots of trees and bushes and flowers. And the building itself, as I said, reminds me of medieval-like architecture. And I would just think it would be nice to see. For me, it's much nicer than Casa Loma that was mentioned. Casa Loma is sort of cold and, it's just the building. But this is the lot and the way it is. It's just like European style.
Well, it's a beautiful home by the sounds of it in a neck of the woods where there are some pretty nice houses, as I understand it, too.
But it's interesting also the comment about the composition with respect to the landscaping and that. And quite often you can't separate certain buildings from the plantings and the surroundings and the site that it's in. You take away from that. And that's interesting comments there about the composition.
Nina, thank you. Let's go to Elizabeth in Toronto. Hello, Elizabeth.
Oh, hello. I'm thrilled with your comments today, and I want to share a visit I had to Montebello once with some friends. I've never been in such a huge log structure that had grandeur. It was elegant, and yet I can't say it was primitive at the same time, but it had a warmth that I've never experienced in any other building. Now, this was the old Seigneury Club, I believe.
It actually became one of the hotels, actually.
That's
similar
true.
In the style to the Chateau Laurier and the Chateau Frontenac. But you're right, that one is the large chimney that's right in the center space, and the feeling of walking around. I don't think we can see that kind of structure anywhere else in the world.
No, and when you hear that it was constructed in such a short period of time, and, you know, the thought of having to bring those logs so far away to build it. It was just a magnificent experience.
Well, in a sense, very much more Canadian than a building like the Frontenac or the Chateau Laurier, because they, you know, I mean, it uses sort of what you think of as Canadian raw material rather than the European influence,
right.
the castle influence.
But let me share another wonderful thing.
Very briefly, Elizabeth, we're almost out of time.
Montgomery's Inn is having a 25th anniversary of its workers and opening, and it's on its original site at Dundas and Islington in Toronto. And it was built in 1830 and still is a center for people meeting. And I think that's wonderful when a building can remain and have its original function still used.
Elizabeth, I got to hold you there. Thank you very much for your call. Thanks to everyone. Some really wonderful and diverse calls here this afternoon. Now, if people want to make a formal bid for their favorite building or to bring it to your attention, how would they do that?
Well, what we're going to do is if the submissions that come in, we're going to consider, even though we're trying to deliberate over these next couple of days. Electronically, if you are into the internet, you could go to or send us email to info@raic.org, O-R-G. The other one would be to fax us at 613-241-5750 or call us at 613-241-3600. The fax would be most appropriate. Whatever you have, whatever buildings, no more details is fine.
All right, Eliseo Temprano, president of the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada. Again, the email address, info@raic.org. The fax number, 613-241-5750. I want to thank those behind the scenes. Technical production of the show this week by Alex Duval, our associate producer Janet Buchan, and Ontario Today is produced by Elizabeth Hay. Monday, Ed Lawrence will be here, and a reminder for you book club fans, we meet again on Wednesday, March 15th. We'll be discussing Bonnie Bernard's A Good House. I'm Dave Stevens. Have a good weekend.
This is Ken Rockburn. Coming up this afternoon on All in a Day, Ralph Klein says his new private health care bill will not erode the Canadian medical system. But critics say it's opened the door to private American hospitals under the Free Trade Act. We'll hear the details. Vladimir Putin has used the war against Chechnya to catapult him into the presidency in Russia. We'll take a look at his policies. We'll also meet a couple of break dancers, and we'll talk with singer-songwriter Ben Suras. That and more on All in a Day right after the news at 4 o'clock.
They refuse to see patients because of a cap on their billings. John McGrath will bring us that story at 8:30.
Okay, thanks, Lynn. It's pretty cold out there. Feels like minus 30 with the wind chill. Coming up after, we'll report regulating retirement homes in the province of Ontario. Is there a need to improve the way we take care of our elderly? We'll take a look at that. That's coming up after World Report. I'm Anthony Germain. The time is 8 o'clock.
Good morning. I'm Judy Madron. This is World Report. In the news today, talks to resolve the DevCo strike resume. Ottawa says there's more money for farmers, but the provinces must pay too.
If a province says that one of their industries needs support, but they say they're not prepared to support it themselves.
And a panel of scientists says it's true, the